August 24th, Rittenhouse went up to the Kenosha area for his job as a lifeguard.
Rittenhouse crossed state lines into a community that was not his.
My grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, and cousins all live in the city of Kenosha.
You know, you've got this young white kid defending the community that he's not even from.
What's your father's name?
Michael Rittenhouse. He lived in Kenosha.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Kyle Rittenhouse was just 17 years old when he drove across state lines to Kenosha, Wisconsin.
The teenager drove from his home in Illinois,
approximately 1 mile to Wisconsin,
across state lines, driving across state borders. He's driving across state lines.
Across the state line, across state lines.
Across state lines. Across state lines.
If you look at the Rittenhouse case, he crossed state lines.
Drives up to events.
Across state lines.
Came across state lines.
Kyle Rittenhouse, who traveled across state lines.
From out of state, out of his own state.
Came across state borders. Whenever you have a situation where a 17-year-old is crossing state lines,
White teenager.
He crosses the state line, drives 30 minutes into Kenosha.
Remember, he came across the line.
He crossed state lines.
Crossed state lines.
Across state lines.
He crossed state lines.
Kyle Rittenhouse, who crossed state lines.
Came across
state lines.
Cross state lines.
He went across state lines.
Cross state lines.
cross state lines, and
Cross state lines.
A 17-year-old kid from out of state.
He makes all
Cross state lines. Cross state lines. Cross state lines.
Across state lines.
Cross state lines. Went over state lines. Drove across state lines. He drove across state. Had his mother drive him across state lines from out of state.
Say the line, Bart.
The teenager traveled across state lines.
Carl Rittenhouse traveled from his home in Illinois across the state line to Wisconsin.
Drove to a different state. Drives up to the state.
Again, drove across state lines.
The state that he does not live in. He traveled there from out of state. He crossed state lines, meaning he traveled across state lines. The 17-year-old who crossed state lines. Now again, he drove from Illinois to Wisconsin. The 17-year-old from out of state who shows up to Kenosha, Wisconsin. He drove from Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kyle Rittenhouse, who again traveled across state lines in a state that he doesn't even live in. He crossed state lines. He drove across state lines.
We know that Kyle Rittenhouse traveled across state lines to go to Kenosha, and he murdered 2 protesters.
Willing to drive across state lines to commit murder.
And did anyone help him cross state lines?
His mama drove him across state lines.
Rittenhouse's mother did not drive him to Kenosha.
Rittenhouse's mother drove her son across state lines.
And look at Rittenhouse, who was driven by his mother across state lines. Frankly, she should have been detained for child endangerment.
My mama would never drive either one of us across state lines to go to a freaking riot.
Yeah.
This 17-year-old conveyed across state lines by mom.
Rittenhouse in Kenosha, allowing his mom to take him across state lines.
Cross state lines. Look, we have a system of laws in the country. There are times where you can defend yourself. It's going to vary from state to state when you can use force to defend your property, but you don't have a right in every state, anywhere in the country, to merely cross state lines.
Yay! Say the line, Bart.